Next up on the show, we have Tom Nelson. Tom is a podcaster and self-described climate realist. He was involved in tech and software for many years. In 2005, as an avid bird watcher, he became heavily involved in debunking a high-profile but bogus ivory-billed woodpecker rediscovery that opened his eyes to the problems with blindly trusting peer-reviewed science. He's been speaking out about the scam of human-caused climate change for a very long time and is on the line now. Tom, thanks for joining us. Where are we now in terms of the Earth's climate? Because if I turn on the television news, then I should be boiling in a pot of molten lava, yet I don't seem to be.
Yeah, I mean, the climate is just continuing to fluctuate like it always has fluctuated. It is a little warmer now than it was in the depths of the Little Ice Age in the 1800s, but it is colder than it was in lots of other different warm periods. And over the last 600 million years, if you look at the current temperature, this is a cold period, we actually are still in an ice age even right now because we have ice at the poles. And for much of that last 600 million years, we had no ice at the poles.
Well, that's something that most people don't know. I bet if you went into any bar or cafe and said to someone, "Did you know that there didn't used to be ice there?" they would go, What are you on about? It's funny, isn't it? But what do you think the reason is for the climate change movement? Because obviously money's a factor, I get that, but I can't help but feel it's a little bit deeper than just chasing the Benjamins.
Yeah, I think money and control. That if you can control CO2, you can control life. So there's just so many ways that they can control us. If they can make us think that CO2 is so dangerous that they have to micromanage us and they have to, stop us from eating meat, and they have to stop us from driving our cars as much as we want and stop us from flying. It's just endless the things that they can do to us if they can scare us about CO2. But the whole CO2 scare is a complete scam.
Parlano tutti veloce questa sera. È già mezz'ora che sto lì a schiacciare, a interrompere per rallentare. Facciamo così direttamente, rallento il video. Faccio prima.
And it's beneficial. More CO2 in the air is better. And then the whole idea that we want to go back to Little Ice Age temperatures, and we can even do that if we wanted, that's all just crazy.
It is interesting. Any time there's either a catastrophe or a huge problem facing the public, all we need to do is give a little bit of money and a little bit of freedom, and we're able to sort it. It's uncanny, isn't it? Do you believe the weather is being modified? Do you think that's being used maybe to make things appear more extreme in certain scenarios, so actually the public will then go, oh, actually maybe there is this huge climate change thing that's going to come and destroy us all?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. But if they're trying to modify the weather or make it more extreme, it's not working, because you look at all the data. I've checked all the data on cyclones and droughts and floods, everything you can think of, and they are not getting worse. So they're just hyping it up. The same bad weather that's always happened is being hyped as being unusual and caused by us, but it's not. There's no signal of bad weather increasing at all.
I don't know if it's the same where you are, but for us here in England, now obviously I know you're in England now, but you're not from England. They started naming storms, and it suddenly came from nowhere, but they never did that before. And it was kind of like, this one's.
Vero, negli ultimi anni iniziano a dare nomi alle tempeste, continuano a farlo, ogni tempesta danno un nome e raccontano la storiella.
One Storm Babbitt or whatever, and it's like, it's January. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm just being told in my ear there was a Hurricane Ike. Was there really? I must have missed that one.
But yeah, it's just another way of trying to scare us that they can name any breeze if they want to name it as a storm, and they can say, "Oh no, we have more named storms than we had before we changed the way that we name storms." But anyway, that's just propaganda. And if you look at the carefully at all the data, there's a guy named Ryan Maui that does a great job of looking very carefully at hurricane and cyclone data, and there's no signal. You can go back as many decades as you want, and they are not getting worse. So,
that's interesting. Yeah, the propaganda I agree with. I mean, someone shared some images just on social media, and it was of someone doing a weather forecast like maybe 10 years ago, and it's green and yellow, and it's got the temperatures on there, and then it's them doing the weather forecast. I think it was last year, maybe the year before, and they're the same temperatures, but it's all orange and red. And he's giving this kind of, illusion of, my goodness me, look how hot it's getting. And you're looking, you're going, that's red. That's 19 degrees. That's not red. That's not red.
Yeah,
that's mad.
There's a ton of that.
Yeah.
There's a ton of just coloring the maps red, and that's supposed to convince us that things are getting worse. So it's kind of a little bit sad that they're trying to convince us using just colors on a map. But again, if you actually look at the real data, like I live in Minnesota over in the US, and we have data that goes back over 110 years for each day of the year. What was the high? What was the low? And as you look at that data, you can see that it was really hot in the 1930s. In Minnesota, it got over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, something like 38 times in the 30s and 40s. And now that almost never happens. So it was way hotter then. And the people who are selling us this propaganda don't want you to look at that data, because it blows the whole scam out of the water if you look at the real data and figure out it's not getting hotter.
Absolutely. Well, what do pro climate change types say to you? If you point out that CO2 is the gas of life, because that is basic, isn't it? You learn about photosynthesis in primary school. It's not like a rocket science thing that you have to go off to 10 years of university for. They were teaching you that when you were little. So how do they respond to that?
It's pretty amazing. I think they almost never do respond to the substance of any article. They'll just say, "Oh, you're not an expert. Trust the experts. Trust the people who have the degrees and are that call themselves climate scientists." So, and I get a lot of people that just ignore me completely or block me. And I do have my own podcast, and I've invited all sorts of climate scientists to be on my podcast and to talk this stuff over, but they don't want to talk about it. They want to avoid talking about the substance, because if you check into the substance, you can find out right away there's no climate crisis, nothing's getting worse. CO2 is not the climate control knob. So they just they're very scared of debate, which they should be, because they're going to lose, because the truth, no truth is on their side, and nothing alarming at all is on their side at all.
I find that funny, like you say there, that people come back to you and say you're not an expert. You get that. So I remember it's during the COVID era, when you're not a virologist, you're not a vaccinologist. It's like, what Bill Gates is. You are hanging on this dude's every word. The guy's making billions off of you believing him. I think there's a play going on here.
Allora, dicevo, la cosa interessante è che appunto ti rifiutano perché tu non sei un esperto della scienza con l'H, e invece parla un Bill Gates che non è né un medico né niente, prendere ogni sua parola come oro colato, anzi prendere gli ordini da lui, e la sua influenza dietro l'OMS non è indifferente, anzi.
Just finally, Tom, you've been working on a documentary, is that right? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called Climate the Movie, and we just had our worldwide premiere yesterday in London. About 300 people attended there. And I'm actually on a road trip. I'm sorry?
I just said, oh, amazing. Sorry, I was under the impression you were working on it, but it's out. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's done, and we're just premiering it in a few places in the Netherlands tomorrow, and it's going to be in Argentina. It's going to be in Washington, D.C. But the big day is March 21st, and that's when it's going to go online kind of everywhere on March 21st. It's going to be on YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, Twitter, Telegram, any place we can think of, because I do think they're going to want to shut it down and try to make sure you don't see it. We're going to put it everywhere so you can see it.
Ok, quindi come dice giustamente, ci pensavo anch'io. Faranno di tutto per buttarlo giù, non lo mettiamo ovunque in modo da farlo vedere in un modo o nell'altro.
I think there's going to be a lot of clips up on social media because Martin Durkin is very talented and he did a great job with this movie. He did 2007's Great Global Warming Swindle. I've been a fan of that since 2007. And this movie is better than the other one.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what kind of movie is it then? Is it like a talking head documentary with experts, or is it, is it something slightly different with, maybe some acting in it?
There are a lot of talking heads and there's a lot of graphs and things, but Martin does a
Quindi ci sono molti relatori.
very good job of keeping it interesting. That's very important, of course. And he uses old footage from like the Romans in the Roman warm period, racing their chariots, and people digging out from big snowstorms in the 70s. And George Washington, it was really cold in his time, so he features that a little bit. So he keeps the whole thing running. And then towards the end, he talks more about the politics and how this whole thing is really about, again, about the self-described elites trying to force their rule onto the working people. And what the climate crisis propaganda really is, a lot of it is a war on the working class. And they're trying to control us, and they're trying to get our money and take away our power. So it's kind of a class war, I would say, part of it.
Oh, absolutely. And then that's exampled by people going around in private jets all around the world telling you not to leave your television on standby and to use a bag for life. It is staggering. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to watching it. So the 21st of March, I should be able to find that everywhere then.
Absolutely. 21st of March, we're hoping that millions of people view it. Yeah.
Oh, lo cerchiamo e lo traduciamo.
Oh, fantastic. Well, best of luck with it, Tom. Thanks for joining us. It's been lovely to talk to you, mate.
Thank you very much. We'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.
Dane Wigington is the main researcher and administrator at geoengineeringwatch.com and was the executive producer of the groundbreaking film The Dimming. Dane has devoted the last 20 years of his life to constant research on the issue of covert global climate engineering operations and the effort to expose and halt them. Dane, thank you so much for joining us. Just from my own experience of, looking up into the sky, it seems to me that these trails that are crisscrossing above us have got far more prevalent in recent months. Is that something you're seeing as well?
They are, and we're hearing about that from around the globe, of course.
Qualcosa che state notando anche voi, parla dagli Stati Uniti.
And they're continuing to ramp up rapidly. Many reasons for that. The more damage they do, the more they feel compelled to increase the size of the projects themselves, Gareth. I mean, this is doubling down on insanity, and that's exactly what they're doing.
What I do see as well is the normalization of it. I'm not someone that, I don't play these sort of video games like Grand Theft Auto and that kind of stuff. But I do see screenshots that people share from that, and there's these chemtrails in the sky and that, and you can see that they're just purposely trying to normalize it, aren't they?
Sì, questo è da parecchi anni che lo fanno, una decina di anni, bravissimo a dirlo. E ficcano le scie chimiche, adesso ho fatto degli esempi nei videogiochi, no? Che gli capita di vedere screenshot nei videogiochi, nei cartoni animati. Vi faccio un altro esempio stupido: io abito non all'acquario di Genova, cosa stavo per dire, abito vicino all'acquario di Genova e ci vado da quando sono piccolo, sono andato 3-4 volte. Una volta che sono andato dove ero più grande, più maturo, conoscevo certe cose, anzi già le divulgavo. Insomma, c'era una sorta di simulatore con le prime occhialini in 3D, quelle cosine lì. E proprio in quello spettacolino c'erano le scie chimiche. Nelle pubblicità me ne vengono in mente del passato, mi pare che nella pubblicità Vodafone e così via, è effettivamente veramente pieno, ma proprio per normalizzare e farle passare inosservate.
For the younger generations, whereas people like me and you, we can go, well, I remember when they weren't there.
Certainly, we see them in Disney films, kids' animated films. This is all part of the conditioning process, correct? But this is a climate engineering Manhattan project, Garth. This is astoundingly obvious in our skies for anyone that has their eyes wide open, which unfortunately is far too few at this point. And the damage being done is a near-term existential threat. And again, I know we face a multitude of concerns and challenges, but what we would argue at geoengineeringwatch.org, if we don't deal with this biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, nothing else will matter soon. If the planet's life support systems cease to function, if every breath we take is toxic, where do we go with that? Obviously not far. So again, that's why we're so focused on this specific issue. Because if we don't deal with it, this is not just weather warfare, it's also biological warfare. And the amount of elements we're inhaling, to give some quantification to that, recent air studies indicate that we may be breathing millions of nanoparticles in every single breath we take. And to put the size of those particles into context, you can fit up to 100,000 nanoparticles across the width of a single human hair. So these are unimaginably small particles, which makes them very bioavailable, very bioaccumulative. Every person we test, Garth, hair, blood, urine, is packed with aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese. These are all very toxic. You combine them, it's even worse. It's not a good situation.
E sono gli elementi classici e rinvenuti in tutto il mondo proprio a riguardo dell'irrorazione clandestina di scie chimiche. Comunque è una gran puntatona questa. La parte prima, questa parte le voglio ritagliare e le piazziamo sia su Rumble che su YouTube. Mamma mia, che puntata.
Why do you think that it's being done? Why do you think governments and the military, because there seems to be a military involvement in it, why do you
Dietro a tutte queste tecnologie vi ricordo che c'è DARPA, quindi
think they're doing this?
I think maybe the more appropriate question would be, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't we expect them to do this when climate engineering is a covert weapon for the controllers, a weapon with which they can bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault? And this is why when we go back even 62 years, as I commonly reference, the start to our weekly commercial-free, non-political update at geoengineeringwatch.org. It's called Global Alert News. We're on stations across the U.S. And the beginning of that broadcast, it's on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. The first 20 seconds.
Geoingegneria scritto in inglese watch.org.
From 62 years ago, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson, on film, on the record, ranting like a lunatic, stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer even then, and quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. So the ultimate answer to your question is it is about power and control. And people commonly ask them, why would they do this to themselves? And we have enough examples of what they've already done to themselves to understand we're not dealing with sanity. We're dealing with power addicts, and they're not going to stop utilizing that power until there's nothing left unless we stop them.
Oh, absolutely. But it comes back to that whole, they wouldn't do that. No, you wouldn't do that. And it's people trying to actually, they view governments and, you know, the elite in general through their own moral compass, don't they? Which is like looking at a serial killer through your own moral compass. You're never going to be able to kind of relate those two together because you're not a serial killer. There has been, particularly in the West, a large increase in illness over the last 2 years. Is to do with. Do you think maybe the increase in illness is connected to the sky in some way?
It's certainly a part of it. There's absolutely no disputing that, logically, rationally. When we know we're inhaling these elements and they're...
Collegate anche alla puntata precedente dove vi ho riportato la questione delle microplastiche e l'avvelenamento in generale, ovvio. Andiamo a mettere tutto insieme, comunque l'ho discusso la volta scorsa.
When they're inhaled, they do much more damage. For example, most of your listeners and followers, I'm sure, know that aluminum is very damaging. It's toxic to all life forms, period, no exception. But when you have inhaled aluminum, it's far more damaging than ingested aluminum because it enters through the nasal passages into the olfactory nerve, goes into the bloodstream, crosses the blood-brain barrier. We can't eliminate this part of the equation. It is absolutely a part of the equation and becoming worse by the day. It's affecting our food, our water, everything as well. Again, these particles so small that they're bioavailable and absorbed into everything. So it's affecting the web of life. And there's other bigger aspects too to this, Gareth, that are important to consider. If we take one...
Qui diceva Gareth il nome.
One single component of this, the damage to the ozone layer, which climate engineering is the single biggest factor destroying the ozone layer. If we had no other troubles, no other challenges, that by itself is an immediate near-term existential threat. No ozone layer, no terrestrial life on Earth, and very little aquatic life. And that's now. We're seeing, based on readings that we take at geoengineeringwatch.org with a former NASA contract engineer, the current estimates are that the overall ozone layer globally is down to about 23% remaining on average. That means less at the polar regions, more in the mid-latitudes, but that's still approaching functional collapse of the ozone layer. And
Ozono. Strato di ozono.
again, people can feel that. Perhaps you have too, the intensity of the sun on surfaces when you're in an unobstructed sunlight situation. It's far more intense and far more penetrating a heat. We know it's killing plankton, for example. If we look at the downstream effects, I'm trying to paint a picture of the cascading scenario we have here. So if we look at the destruction of the ozone layer, the intense UV radiation, and we're getting UVC on the surface now. That's the last spectrum of UV radiation before X-ray. It's killing insects, killing plankton, for example, and we have in the Atlantic peer-reviewed study to prove plankton populations
Secondo una rivista peer-to-peer,
are now down about 90%. No.
allora qui si aprono un paio di cose veramente importanti. Innanzitutto mi sembra parecchio strano che i primi che fanno allarmismo climatico dicendo che quello che propagandano nelle TV eccetera sia una truffa, ma in realtà è un'operazione psicologica. Sto parlando di, avevate visto insieme a me, Rotary Club, Rotary International, Club di Roma eccetera, che hanno diffuso il countdown per la fine dell'umanità e fanno finta di stare dalla nostra parte, parlano di, come si dice, cambiamento geoclimatico, di crisi geoclimatica, che parla di movimenti problematiche al nucleo terrestre, adesso non mi ricordo bene, però in sostanza era quello. E mi sembra strano, no? Che loro che fanno i finti alternativi alla fine non parlino mai di queste cose, appunto, non parlano di geoingegneria, non parlano tantomeno di questa vera e propria terraformazione della problematica dell'ozono. Ok, perché ho seguito la questione società creativa, ecco che non mi veniva il nome, società creativa sottoposta ai massoni, Rotary Club International, ancora al di sopra, Club di Roma, eccetera. E quindi nada, la cosa buffa, paradossale è quella. Con la geoingegneria stanno creando questi effetti, con il progetto ARP hanno creato il buco nell'ozono e via così. E poi vanno a urlare al cambiamento climatico, tra l'altro. Questa è terraformazione, quindi si torna anche alla linea di David Icke che non fa mai una piega e si finisce lì.
Plankton know people. So I know I'm giving bits and pieces to this puzzle, but the picture I'm trying to paint is that the vast majority have absolutely no comprehension of how immediate and dire our situation is.
Aggiungo l'ultima cosa, guardatevi anche l'approfondimento che avevo fatto sul Grey Goo, quindi lo scenario anche secondo cos'era la NATO o l'ONU, non mi ricordo, i documenti stessi ufficiali che trattano dello scenario Grey Goo, peste grigia. Sì, un aspetto che si sta verificando insieme alla singolarità e all'essere umano 2.0. Ecco che arriviamo al perché della terraformazione. David Icke già lo aveva previsto 10 anni fa spiegandolo molto bene, quindi mettete tutto insieme.
And how big a part of the situation climate engineering is.
What do you think CO2 has to play in this scenario? Because I'm thinking of an ozone layer. I think most people think of an ozone layer as a one-way street. So it's this UV radiation coming through. But actually, if something's destroyed, you know, if a wall in a house is destroyed, someone can get in, but someone can get out. So is that something that's maybe happening as well, that maybe the CO2 is leaving the atmosphere, which is then not helping plant growth and stuff like that? Because as much obviously as CO2 is vilified, it's also the gas of life.
Piante che vorrebbero rimpiazzare con le piante ibride. Guardiamo anche Hypernatura, la Natura 2.0.
This is where the equation becomes complex, and what we hope to do to build bridges is to have everybody from every side of this argument, every side of the fence, to understand that There is no legitimate discussion about climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering factor. So in regards to CO2, yes, it's necessary, but when you alter atmospheric chemistry to this degree, that is still problematic. I would give water as an example. Of course, we know that we can't last more than 2 or 3 days without water, but if we're a foot underwater, whole new equation, 2 or 3 minutes is our timeline. So again, when you alter atmospheric chemistry to this degree, it changes the entire energy balance of the planet, and climate engineering is doing that as well, Garth. Their stated purpose, so your listeners understand, the stated purpose of global climate intervention operations, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, to the science terms, and those are important, by the way, to use the science terms, because the chemtrails term are what the media and the controllers want us to use, which they then utilize to immediately marginalize this topic. So if we stick to the science terms, the stated purpose is to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy, thermal radiation, to slow down the warming of the planet. What do those particles also do? They trap that heat. And that's not being calculated into any of the modeling. They destroy the ozone layer, as I mentioned. They disrupt the hydrological cycle. They contaminate soils and waters all over the globe, which means forest floor soils are contaminated, forest microbiome contaminated. So the forests are dying. So from the Amazon to the boreal forests, they are no longer carbon sinks, meaning absorbing carbon. They are carbon sources. They are emitting more carbon than they are absorbing. And all of these factors lead in so many ways back to climate engineering. I do want to stress that I am not downplaying the other sources of damage we have done to the planet. We've been very bad stewards of planet Earth in so many ways, but climate engineering, the epitome of that destruction.
Just finally, Dane, and more, I guess the most important thing is, what do you think we can do about it? Because when you're discussing the size alone of these nanoparticles, I mean, I can't even quantify that as a size in my head, given just how small it is. And obviously, I'm breathing that in every day. My children are breathing that in every day. It's going into the soil. It's growing the food that I'm sticking in my belly. Do you know what I mean? So I'm kind of like, what do you think we can do to try and stop this? Apart from, I guess, what you're doing, mate, which is alerting people to it.
Prima cosa, protocolli disintossicanti, avete raccolte intere su questo, tra cui anche ci sono riuscito anche a farvi risparmiare con il CBD, che anche su quello è un ottimo disintossicante. Però ci sono tanti protocolli naturali, fai da te da casa, che a basso costo.
And that is the only way forward. We must reach a critical mass of
Anche una sorta di protezione, ci sono diverse forme di protezione. Abbiamo cercato di dare tutte le soluzioni possibili e immaginabili, le trovate. Chiedete e vedrete le nostre raccolte, le nostre pagine, i nostri video. Resta in replica, non vi preoccupate. Adesso guardiamo poi se tralasciare la parte finale, semmai la spostiamo, semmai la parte finale, il prossimo autore. Anche perché questa parte l'abbiamo dovuta rallentare.
awareness so that those participating and their families understand what they're participating in, from military members to families of defense contractors, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, all those that are unknowingly, perhaps in some cases, participating in this, because there's much compartmentalization. That's how the military works. This is, again, a climate engineering Manhattan project. The left hand is not told what the right hand's doing.
Progetto Manhattan, la maggior parte delle cose, tra cui la bomba atomica, sono state decise al Bohemian Club con Reagan e altri. in uno degli appuntamenti estivi al Bohemian Group. Guardate il documentario.
So we need to break that down. If we can fully expose this issue and populations around the globe understand what their governments have done to them without their knowledge or consent, only then do we have any chance of stopping this. When I started this battle 20 plus years ago, I only heard my own voice coming back at me. No one listened. And now we are working with former U.S. Air Force generals, we're working former Canadian Minister of Defense. I'm hearing from legislators all over the globe, top people in the medical industry, they're waking up to this issue now. So again, if we can reach a critical mass of awareness, I would
Vedete, questa è un'ottima cosa.
argue that is how we have a chance of stopping this. If we can stop it, if we can allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done, that would at least buy us time. And that's worth fighting for. But I want to stress, hiding from this won't make it go away. Many people take the approach of what amounts to hiding in their cabin on the Titanic. If the ship's going down, hiding in your cabin won't save you. We need to get all hands on deck and to deal with this issue, Garth.
Yeah, I agree. I think raising awareness, having enough people, like you use that term, the critical mass. I think you could apply that to pretty much everything that's wrong with this world. You know, whether that be politics or conflicts or whatever. It's all about the people coming together. Dane, thank you so much for joining us, and I would urge all our viewers to head over to geoengineeringwatch.org and watch Dane's videos. You upload stuff and you're writing on there. It's a constantly evolving topic and a constantly evolving website, so I would urge people to check that out. But Dane, thank you again, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your voice in this battle, Garth. Thank you.
Veramente una magnifica partecipazione, veramente magnifica. Allora, spostare la parte finale, il prossimo autore, giusto 20 minuti, nella puntata di aggiornamenti settimanali. Ok? Così ce la teniamo buona. È stata un puntatone questa sera. Questa puntata veramente è eccezionale, è stata eccezionale, ancora dobbiamo finire di vedere, manca l'ultimo autore. Le ultime dichiarazioni, veramente potentissimo questa serata, mi è piaciuta un sacco e ci continua a motivare e a soddisfare, ecco, nel seguire questa piattaforma. È proprio quello che ci aspettavamo da questa piattaforma. In questo modo ci possiamo aggiornare dall'estero al meglio delle possibilità, nonostante tutti gli ostacoli che vi ho raccontato proprio la volta scorsa. Allora, io, il dottore e questo ricercatore, collegato anche a ricercatori di prima, anche perché c'era un filo conduttore, quindi farei il ritaglio sul dottore, che mi è piaciuto. Sarà un piccolo ritaglino che metteremo ovviamente su Rumble, perché su YouTube non posto. Invece gli ultimi due ricercatori su truffa climatica e geoingegneria li metterei insieme e li possiamo anche caricare su YouTube. È stata una partecipazione allucinante, formidabile, un ricercatore che non conoscevo e sto apprezzando da morire. Seguiremo non solo il film che è stato citato nello spezzettone precedente, ma anche il sito di quest'autore, in modo da tradurre anche i suoi lavori, perché mi è piaciuto senza limiti, veramente. Non mi sarei mai aspettato personaggi così, e anche più di quanto mi aspettasse Iconic. Davvero tanta roba. Ci dice Soka, ecco, il mio pensiero era quello. Penso la stessa cosa, provo la stessa cosa.